All right, welcome to episode 53 of Seize the Moment podcast. Today we have a very special guest. He's a former professional boxer, author of the novel Bethany Park, and his memoir, Punching from the Shadows. We welcome Glen Sharp. Hi, Glen.
Hi. Hello, you guys. Glad to be here. Thanks.
And thank you so much for coming on. And so the first thing that we're going to talk about is, so in private, kind of Glenn and I have been talking about what he's been working on in terms of his new novel and some of the issues that have been coming up in it. And the issues that have been coming up for him, right, are sort of very related to existentialism and existential philosophy and even psychotherapy. So Glenn, can you tell us a little bit about the novel?
Well, I have a draft written that's not very good. So I kind of have to go back to the drawing board. But the general idea, it's kind of a follow-up to the Bethany Park that I wrote. So that was about a 13-year-old kid who's, trying to make the track team and have some other kind of concerns. So I try to weave up. And that, a little bit of philosophical thinking that would kind of ironical that a 13-year-old kid would have while he's still putzing around in general life. And so this is that same kid about 5 years later. He's working he's a senior in high school, just about to get out of high school, and he's working at a gas station, the old-fashioned full-service gas stations where there's no self-serve, and you check the tires and check the oil and wash the windows and everything. And it's right on an interstate. So there's a lot of people traveling from all over the country, stopping by, coming by. So the guy is trying to make sense of what he's going to do with his life. Getting out of high school is kind of a benchmark in a person's life. He's trying to make sense of what he's trying to do. And he's talking about roads and directions. And he's kind of using maps that he's unconsciously and ironically commenting on his own life about how lost he is. So that's my general premise, and I'm still working to make it readable.
Interesting. And what are some of the themes that you want to explore in it?
Well, like when you talk a lot about authenticity on your show and on your tweets and that, and so an inspiration for this novel is what I think is a great novel, Walker Percy's The Moviegoer. I don't know if you've ever read that, but it is a really good novel. It's about a guy in his 30s, probably young 30s, who's facing, what you would call an existential crisis, where he's realizing his life is kind of a sham, and he doesn't know what he's going to do to try to live a more authentic existence, and he's struggling with that. So I'm just kind of transposing that to an 18-year-old kid. So he of course doesn't have the experience that Binks Bowling, the protagonist in The Moviegoer, has, but he's still dealing with the same issues that he sees grown-ups and already as a kid he can see in grown-ups that they're living kind of artificial lives, or they're not really true to themselves and are hypocritical, and he's trying to figure out a way not to be like that, but he doesn't know what to do in order to not be like that. So that's where he's kind of lost. He sees it's important to try to be an authentic human being, but he's finding out that's a pretty difficult job.
Yeah, it is difficult because society tells us who we have to be, right? Our parents, our social group. There's pressure coming from all these different areas. And a lot of them are always giving you feedback, telling you what path you should go on. But then the thing is, a lot of times it's like, but what do you actually want for yourself, right? Do you want to listen to what society tells you is a good path? Sometimes, yeah, it depends. Sometimes you could see something like, maybe somebody is meant to be a doctor or a lawyer or a certain profession or get a certain level of status, but not a lot of these things that are available for people to do. It's not a one size fits all kind of thing.
Right.
It's hard because a lot of people have to discover for themselves, what is it you really want to do? What is it that you're meant to do? Like, what's your purpose? Right.
Yeah.
And I could see how for the 18-year-old character, right? How is he needs to, I'm guessing because I'm just learning about this, but I could see how for that character, he has to see what it is that he truly wants to do. Does he want to do what everybody else is doing? and what is authentic to him, what's real to him.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's difficult. And when you're 18 years old, you don't have a lot of context in the world upon which to make your decisions, because you've basically led the life that your parents have led for you, and you're just starting to branch out a little bit. And you mentioned a good point. Society kind of dictates the way that you should go, and sometimes your peers, your friends are kind of pushing you in a way, and that's not always wrong. So in this kid's case, his family expects him to go to college, and his two best friends are excited about going to college, but this kid is not really intellectually interested, and so he's feeling kind of forced to go to school, which is not a bad thing for an 18-year-old kid to do, but it's something he's not comfortable with. So it's not always that society is leading you wrong or telling you to go in directions that are not good for you. I mean, sometimes you have to find out when you're being led somewhere, well, maybe that's a path you need to go for a while. Anyway, so it's pretty difficult. And I think that's in relation to Kierkegaard's thinking that you're most in despair when you don't know you're in despair, and that you have to come to understand that life is a struggle, and you're struggling to find your true self or your authentic self. And to think that it shouldn't be a struggle is the confusion. So I think that might be what this kid is experiencing too. He doesn't realize how difficult life is supposed to be, and so he's just beginning to encounter that.
Interesting. And that really reminds me of, so we had William Irwin on the show. I think it was about a year and like a month ago, something like that. Something like in the beginning of May. So William Irwin he's a pretty notable existential philosopher. And so he wrote the follow-up to Siddhartha, which obviously you guys know.
Wow.
Yeah. So he wrote a book called Little Siddhartha. And it was pretty much the theme of it was the sort of relationship between father and son. And the way he kind of explained it was, well, I don't want to say explain, the way the story is sort of narrated is that the father is this like really kind of controlling narcissist, and the son is this really sort of empathic, compassionate kid. And so the tug of war is the father trying to sort of turn him into this kind of like, I don't know if this is the right term for the time, but it was like a business magnate. Like he wanted him to sort of become, it wasn't an industrialist because it was way before the time. But the idea was that he wanted him to become kind of like one of these top tier merchants. And the kid had his own ideas. He said, look, I really like poetry, and I like philosophy, and I like to think about life, and I like to think about things. And his dad is like, yeah, I don't care. This is not going to pay the bills. Like, this is not enough for you. And so what was interesting about that, it wasn't that he said like, in any sort of vague sense where he said like, look, you need to be able to take care of yourself, however you do it, that's definitely up to you. But I want you to know that if one avenue doesn't work out, I'm going to try to push you elsewhere. It was like, no, you need to be a merchant. Like, this is the only path that makes sense. Anything else in life is a waste of time. And so in the book, it was like this sort of tug of war and it wasn't even a tug of war that was so much external as it was internal. Because on the one hand, obviously, because he was a boy, he wanted to please his dad. And then on the other hand, he wanted to be who he was internally, right? He wanted to be true to himself. And so kind of as the book progresses, you see it like little by little, as the kid kind of tries to pull away, the dad tries to gain more and more control over his life and becomes sort of more of a micromanager. And so what's so cool about the story is it's a prominent theme, and obviously in existentialism. We can even kind of go back to Sartre and even Simone de Beauvoir as it pertains to feminism and sort of obviously what it means to be a woman. And kind of in William Irwin's idea, his conception was essentially that a lot of times that authenticity is sort of stifled, not only obviously by society at large, but by the people that are supposed to kind of help you become the best version of yourself.
Mm-hmm. That's pretty interesting. Little Siddhartha. Right?
Yeah.
Is that what you say?
Yeah.
That's probably something I should read.
Yeah, it's a very good one.
I think in this case, so these stories are pretty personal. So, that the story of the 13-year-old kid was pretty much based on my life, and so this story be. And so I don't think of course, there's always tension between the father and the son, and that would be the case in this story. But there's not so much a controlling aspect of the father. I mean, there's two strong wills kind of battling against each other. And of course, the father wants the son to make some choices that are going to lead to a comfortable existence. But he understands you got to you're going to take whatever road you're going to take. You're just trying to hover around a little bit to make sure you don't go off road too far. So and that's kind of some of the questions the kid is dealing with too. So he knows that he has to follow some certain road. He just can't go four-wheeling all over the country. He has to follow a path. And I don't think if it's a story about a boy, that a story like this has to involve the father, because you're dealing with father issues some way. If not a literal father, at least a father figure in your mind, you know.
Yeah, and a lot of times the way people find out what it is that they want to do is by doing something they didn't want to do in the first place. Because by going through that struggle, or by seeing what it is that you don't like, you start to see what it is that you do. For example, there were like in my personal life. With my dad, right? So I guess I won't get too specific, but when I was around 15, he was thinking, okay, it's time for you to get a job, you know, be a man, learn what it is to make money, have your own money, all of that. And that's a great thing. The job though that I did was like I was working in a warehouse, like a kind of like manual labor, all that, and I thought I was going to be into it, but I don't know. I guess maybe because I was just 15, I had this bad mindset about it. I didn't like it at all, and sad to admit this, but after just 2 days of working there, I quit. You know, and that's not good at all, actually. But
depends on who you ask.
Yeah, but I saw that by at least trying to do something like that, you know, what it is that I didn't want to do. So I kind of knew as I was going further in life, maybe what kind of job I was interested in, or what it is that I really wanted to do, which is more along the lines of kind of like what we're doing here. Mm-hmm. So yeah, you can see how that's not related to that kind of job, but. Yeah.
Interesting. And then it's like sometimes what happens is obviously like when you're in some sort of, I don't know, academic or work setting and you feel like you're forced into it, even if in the time, right, in the kind of short term it feels awful, in the long term it could kind of be a springboard for you, right? So it's like you could kind of get to know or get to really sort of seriously consider what it is that you want.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think I had the same type of experience. I remember when I was so my kind of stepfather, I mean, that's something that I've talked about ad nauseum, not really going to get into it anymore. But the point was that he was obviously like one of these like pushy people. So when he's like, look, you don't want to kind of go to school, then obviously you're going to have to go to work. And so for me, I ended up like working in these like different retail stores, even as a security guard at some point. And so I absolutely hated it. And so for me, the thing was like, I kind of realized back then that no matter what I had to do, or no matter what I was going to do, I had to go back to school. And so like, look, I didn't like the way he went about it because I never really think that he cared about me in that sense, because he never really sat down with me and said, okay, hey, let's talk about what you want to do for a living. It was just like, you have a choice. You either go to school or you go to work. I don't care what you do. Just pretty much do whatever. And so kind of for me, even though the experience was really crappy of like working, you know, kind of what minimum wage at that time was $7.15. So working for $7.15 an hour was obviously really shitty. And so at the very least, it kind of got me to think about like, okay, what do I want to do if I'm going back into academia in some way? Because I can't do this for the rest of my life.
Yeah. Right. I mean, that's an important part of the learning process. So even when you're confused and you really have no understanding of what you want to do, your experiences of finding out what you don't want to do are very informing too. So like I said, in my personal life, I really had no interest in going to school, going to college, or I had no intellectual interest. And so I did different jobs. I worked in gas stations and factories, and worked in a construction job for a while. And so I realized, oh man, I don't want to do this. And so that kind of provides a different context to look at. To you're looking at school, or maybe having an office job, so you could say, well, that doesn't sound too appealing, but it might sound less unappealing than some of the other jobs that I've had. And you know, you just kind of see what the world has to offer you, and sometimes you're choosing what's least offensive rather than something you are excited about, and you later in life, when you have some opportunity, you might start then thinking about what interests you or excites you, but sometimes you just have to find something that you could tolerate.
Yeah. And
And,
that's,
and,
mhm.
and
Go ahead.
that's an important part of life too.
Yeah. And then sometimes kind of what holds us back is a sense of hopelessness. So even if you have a sense or an image of what it means to be your authentic self, like in terms of your career, your relationships, whatever it is, there's also a possibility that if you don't feel like you can actualize whatever that potential is, you're going to be the one to hold yourself back. And I remember academically, that's what it pretty much was for me. So when I chose like work over school, it was literally because I just didn't have any faith in myself. So kind of the other aspect of me going back to school was not, I mean, obviously it was also like the fact that I didn't want to work for 750 an hour, but then it was also that I had support and I had people pretty much helping me and telling me that I could succeed academically. Whereas like when I was starting out, I didn't have that. So in the context of authenticity, Glenn, what do you feel like are some of the factors that could pretty much hold us back from becoming the true selves outside of kind of society, the ones that are more sort of intrapersonal as opposed to interpersonal?
Um, I've come to think, and I know I've been influenced here by Walker Percy again,
Mm-hmm.
that um, Percy was, I think people describe him as a Catholic existentialist. So he was a pretty devout Catholic. At the same time, he wrote 5 or 6 of these great existentialist novels. And what he perceived, and he was writing in, I think mainly in the 50s and 60s, this happened. And he was writing about what he saw as in our society, we're living at a time when the traditional ways of life were decaying. So, in older generations, this was, if you see even just America, this was a pretty Christian, kind of Protestant oriented place. And that started to break down in the 20th century, and people have kind of left mainstream devout Christianity in numbers, and then there's so much diversity in other people of other cultures, other nations come in here. So that's, it's not that, say, America is a white Christian nation. There's just so many other ways of life you can look. And then there are so many opportunities that people have in life, and that's something that this society is afforded people, that, they can choose what they want to do with their life, work-wise or family-wise. And so you have a lot more opportunities. That leads to a lot more confusion. And that was his general thinking. The life was a lot easier, say, 300 years ago, when you didn't have a lot of options. You just kind of grew up and got married, or, started a family. You don't really have a lot of choices. You just kind of get to it. But in today's world, we have so many opportunities, and there's no quote right answer what you're supposed to do, and that really makes life difficult for people because of all their the anxiety of having all these choices available to them. And he saw that was kind of a breakdown of our society. And kind of related to that, he thinks it's important, or he thought it was important to like know your past. So you might know where you are at the current moment, and you see all these opportunities or directions that you might go, but it's important to know how you got to where you are at the moment in making decisions about the future. And so some of that is not affected by you. You have no choice about where you're born or when you're born or who your parents are. But, from every moment from that, you're becoming incrementally a little more responsible for your existence all the time. So by the time you're 18, you're pretty responsible for yourself, regardless of how good or bad of a start you got. You're responsible for dealing with the conditions that you were given. And he thought that was important to have a pretty good understanding of your history as a way of understanding what your future is going to be. And that's kind of what I'm trying to talk about in this novel. I'm using the roads as an analogy, or maybe even a metaphor. So, if you're at a certain spot, you don't know which way to go. Sometimes you have to know how you got to where you are right now to know which direction you want to take in the future.
Yeah.
And
So, mhm.
so that's kind of a larger view. That kind of takes you out of the immediate, world of people you're dealing with, and puts it in some kind of abstract kind of thinking. But I think that's important too.
Right. And why I love that idea so much is because it's very sort of it's what's the word? So it's very kind of I guess based on automatic habits and behaviors. Like a lot of times when people do things, they're not really aware of the fact that sort of they're behaving in a way that was, let's say, how can I phrase this? That was, let's say, relevant or pertinent in any particular context in the past, but is now not so helpful anymore. So I think so. My understanding of what you're saying is when you're looking at your past, you're pretty much empathizing with yourself in terms of kind of your defenses, right? You're sort of understanding
Yeah.
why it is that you've kind of developed these habits and how they've served you at some point in the past. But maybe if you're sort of aware of what they're doing to you now or how they're affecting you now, then you kind of you're at this fork in the road where now you get to choose whether you want to hold on to those old coping mechanisms or whether you want to try something new and adapt to the context.
Also, when you're doing that, you're kind of zooming out and you're taking a different perspective on your life, right? You're not, because when you're in the moment and you're surrounded by all this stimulus, this person's telling you this, that person's telling you that, you're feeling a certain way, your attention is so it's so suppressed to what's currently happening.
Right.
But Glenn, what I like about what you're saying is what you end up doing is you kind of take this long view of how you got where you are, and it takes a different kind of look at yourself that gives you a better perspective on what to do moving forward,
Mm-hmm.
which is smart, right? Because again, if your attention's all in what's happening right now,
Mm-hmm.
it's hard to know what to do. You're kind of like ha ha ha, you know, your attention's going all over the place. You don't know how to move forward.
Mm-hmm.
So
I like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I like it too. I think the zoom perspective is a good idea. So I kind of look at it as looking on a map. You know, if you think about, say, the little town that you're living in, and you think of that as your world, your choices are limited, or certainly you're thinking about your opportunity for changes are limited. But if you look at a bigger map from a higher level, you see, oh my God, there are thousands of these little towns, and they're all connected by these roads, and they're bigger towns. And so uh, the perspective of whether you're looking at it from a bird's eye view or the ground eye view really provides the context where you can see what choices you can make. It may be what you should make, but certainly what you can make.
Yeah. And sometimes people really get stuck in that self-preservation mode where like all they see is kind of I guess it's sort of not only I guess the past, yes, but then also all they see is kind of sort of the things that they should be afraid of, where they see the sort of the fear that's behind them, in front of them, and they kind of get stuck in this mode where it's like the only thing that they could kind of see is how they can survive. And the sort of ways of coping with the world obviously are just ways of survival or techniques for survival. So they get kind of stuck in these patterns where they're literally just repeating the same behaviors that they repeated before. But again, kind of contextually dependent, right? They don't really serve them in any significant way anymore.
and what's important is from the perspective of an 18-year-old. For example, say he's feeling fear about going to college, right? There's another perspective to it, right, where it's not like something he's inclined to do.
Yep.
But say we go to the fear part of it, right? Sometimes, I mean, especially if you're 18, you don't have the context to know that maybe you have to do something you're afraid of in order to grow, right? Uh, Sometimes, you know, what you might do when you're younger is instead of try to face your fear, you try to escape from it. And that could cause a whole bunch of issues that then, you know, later you look at yourself, you're like, oh, no, I could have gone, you know, I could have gone to college, or I could have done this move, or I could have done that move. Had I known this would have been better for me if I did something that I'm afraid of.
Right. And even had the confidence, right? Or somebody told that kid, like kind of what I was talking about for my own story, that if somebody told me beforehand, right, before I went out into the working world, like, hey, no, you can actually succeed in college. I mean, because the fear itself is rational, right? The fear makes sense, right? If you really don't believe you're going to succeed, you're obviously not going to try. So the idea is, and obviously I want to kind of take this to Glenn too, is my thinking is that when it comes to authenticity and kind of helping people express it, even helping ourselves express it, right, what we need is encouragement. So, I mean, for Glenn, like, what do you think in terms of fostering authenticity? What do you feel like are the elements of that, if there is a formula?
Well, I'm not sure there is a formula.
Yeah.
I guess. Well, I think maybe each person has to find out for themselves what
Yep.
their individual formula is, and that's kind of the difficulty of that. But you know, I think you're right. Having some sense of support from someone who you have regard for helps a lot. So even if, like, say in the world that I grew up in, and this kid in this story grew up in, he came from a family who wanted him to leave home and go to school, continue with his education, and they thought that he was more than capable of doing that pretty well. So, and he had friends who were going to do that as well. So that's, I guess you could call that peer pressure, but that's also kind of support, because you're in a world in which people are pretty confident that this is the right thing to do. But there's at an individual level, and maybe there's reasons for this too, I don't know, but you could be afraid of just leaving home. So say some of your friends they're going to go away to start their lives, but you can, for whatever reason, kind of be afraid of leaving your cocoon, you know, and if that's the reason you don't leave, then you've created a situation for yourself. You're going to have to deal with it sometime. Like you said, Alan, you later on you're going to realize, oh, I could have done this, and life would have worked out like this, but I whether wasn't emotionally ready, or I was afraid, or something like that. And I think coming to terms with that is a good part of authenticity. There's a lot in our life that we don't have control over, and we are just affected by it. But there's a lot in our life that we're responsible for, and we have to take responsibility for that. So, like Leon, you were mentioning, say you have some coping mechanisms, whatever. So you got through life in a certain way, and that might well have been necessary at the time. But like you said, you come to a point where you need to act in a different way to keep moving forward, and you have to come to terms with that. Where if you say the person didn't change their coping mechanisms, they have to come to terms with that was their choice not to make that change. And that's what's kind of hard. To me, that's the hardest part of authenticity, is being honest with yourself about yourself.
Right. And I kind of also just kind of want to be clear, like for our audience, because sometimes the way existentialism, whether psychotherapy or philosophy, is misinterpreted, is that what we're saying is pretty much, I mean, okay, let me not say it's fully misinterpreted. This was also partially Sartre's fault, who said that pretty much we are just pure freedom and kind of we can do whatever we want, right? And life is sort of our responsibility fully. So that's not true. So
Right.
the way we kind of conceptualize it in existential therapy is the way that people sort of react in their coping mechanisms are not their fault. So they're pretty much reactions to toxic environments. There's a reason why they responded to their environments they did, the way they did, right? And so what we usually mean when we say that a person has to take responsibility at some point, it's not that they need to automatically change and just switch over and say, no, I'm not using these coping mechanisms anymore. I'm now using these healthy ones. It's not that simple. So what we're saying is what we're saying by taking responsibility is not that you have to by yourself change. It's just that you would need to ask for help, right? Whether that's in the form of a therapist, whether that's in the form of even a life coach, right?
Your friends.
Right, friends, right? Or even I would say some combination of the sort of the elements.
Right.
But the idea is that nobody can really do it on their own. And especially when we're talking about trauma, it's very, very unlikely that somebody can just automatically change their coping mechanisms by even just accepting that those coping mechanisms are unhealthy and they're not helping them in any significant way. They're actually obviously harming them. So kind of just to be clear, right? Because a lot of times when existentialism is sort of attacked, the idea is like, oh, well, this person can just change. And I absolutely agree.
Well, so Glenn, to what you were saying, I think that if I didn't misunderstand, you're saying that pretty much you're responsible for everything. And I mean, in the sense, so I understand what you just explained. That's to be more nuanced about it, right? To say that when you're being responsible for everything, there are some things that happen to you that's not necessarily your fault, right? Fair enough. But Glenn, what I like about what you're saying though is when you say that you're responsible for everything that happens, or your choices or your reactions, it actually kind of puts you in what's a good way? It kind of empowers you, right? It puts you more, instead of like at the effect of what happens, more at the cause, right? So it changes your relationship the moment you take responsibility. You can, for example, if somebody admits to themselves, everything that happened is my fault, right? Then they know that it's in their power to change, like either their reactions or how they deal with certain situations, instead of thinking they're a victim to everything that happens. Not that there aren't victims, right? But to make the point about what it means to be responsible, I mean, I think that's what's important.
And interestingly enough, you can also be both. So you can be both responsible and a victim at the same time in some way. And by responsible, I don't mean blame, where you would say like it's the person's fault, right? So, I mean, okay, so this is a nuanced topic, and I'm going to say this really carefully because I obviously don't want to be misinterpreted. But let's say when you're a therapist and you're like dealing with actual like abuse victims or people who've, let's say, been assaulted in any sort of way, the misinterpretation a lot of times is in the mainstream is something along the lines of, well, if you tell the person they're responsible, you're blaming them, right? That's not what that means. So what it means is that there needs to be a combination of factors, right? On the one hand, obviously you would tell the person it's not their fault because it isn't, right? There's no question about that. So when we're talking about responsibility, what we're really just saying is, okay, what are the elements that contributed to this? And let's say, how can we prevent that? If possible, you can't really prevent anything, but let's say, how can we reduce the chance of something like that happening to you again? So that's what we mean by responsibility. We mean that the person can take some action, right? To, like, let's say, again, can't eliminate anything, but to reduce the chances of, let's say, being a victim in the future, which again does not mean that anybody's blaming the victim, right? That, and if anybody does do that, that's obviously wrong, because regardless of what scenario the person is in, nobody deserves that kind of treatment. So the idea is to sort of figure out the nuance between obviously responsibility and then sort of, you know, the external factors that contributed to whatever your suffering is.
Yeah. Depends on the situation.
Yeah.
So, yeah, responsibility and blame are two entirely different concepts.
Yeah.
So I agree. So,
wait, go ahead. Can you define them for us, please? Like, what's the difference between the two in your understanding?
well, I think I'll try to get back to it at the end. So I had this comment I wanted to make. So I agree with you, Leon, that you're talking about, say, changing your behavior. It's not as easy as saying, well, I'm going to turn left or I'm going to turn right. It's not that easy. But like you were saying, Alan, but you can't be the complete victim. You're responsible for kind of instigating the change. So whether that's associating with different people, whether that's saying, okay, I'm gonna try to start thinking differently about myself or the perspective of that. So you're responsible is that you're the only one who can begin to affect the change. So you're going to need a lot of help along the way, but you're the only one who can begin to affect the change. And blame is like much more simple. Like if you push someone in the road, well, you could get you're wrong there. You could be blamed for that. That's kind of malicious. I don't think of responsibility as a matter of being malicious or purposefully damaging in that sense. I mean, you could be completely with good intentions and still be responsible for the outcome of something, and that's something different than blame.
Yeah. And a lot of times, unfortunately, kind of and I would say all of the time, if not a lot of the times, kind of our beliefs are the culprits. So like, so the sessions and the times that I've dealt with people who are abuse victims, obviously kind of, sometimes what happens is when, you know, in, again, the mainstream, whatever, I don't really like the term, but I'm going to use it. So what happens is people are like, well, why did this person stay, right? Like if the person is continuously abused, right, why are they doing something that's harmful? So because of their belief system. So if you actually talk to these people, what you would find out is that a lot of times they think of the abuse as actually a form of love. They a lot of times think that that is the only form of love. If not, it's just available to them, available to anybody, because they associate one with the other. And they actually believe in the explanations that the abuser gives them. So if they tell them like, oh, well, you know, you were the cause of this, then why would I leave this person? I mean, it's my fault, right? So shouldn't I then change? So the idea is when we talk about blame and responsibility, right? Responsibility means in this case that it's your sort of responsibility, obviously, to get help and to go see a therapist, which is a hard thing in itself, especially if the person believes that they're the problem, right? I mean, a lot of times they're not going to want to deal with the issue. But the idea is it's your responsibility, if there is any, right, to examine your belief system and to examine how your belief system is contributing to your actions and to the choices that you're making. But blame would obviously mean, oh, well, it's your fault, right? You're the reason why you believe the things you do. That's not true. You can't just tell somebody, you can't force yourself to believe anything, right? Beliefs are kind of, there's sort of systems that you could definitely examine and that you can definitely look for evidence for and against, obviously, but they're not things that you could just sort of imbue in yourself, right? right? It's like we see this with religion. Nobody can really believe in anything that they don't want to believe in or that their brain tells them isn't true. So the idea is when it comes to blame and responsibility, the belief system is always a significant part of responsibility. That when if a person especially doesn't believe that they can be responsible, that life sort of happens to them rather than they happen to it, then what's going to happen is obviously they're going to live in a very passive way.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah, because so that's part of authenticity, right? I mean, being able to see that it's your. I mean, okay, so barring the nuance that you gave, that you're responsible for how you live your life, for what choices you make, how they impact you, how they impact the people around you, right? And I mean, how could I put this? Well, mm, so authenticity. I mean, for example, what are some? So, for example, what's the difference between when somebody's being authentic and when somebody's not, right?
Mhm.
So, if let's say somebody's being authentic when they're being true to themselves, right? When they're taking responsibility, when maybe they do the thing that they're afraid to do. Um,
Or when they're not lying to themselves.
when they're not lying to themselves, when they're when they're acting through their own intentions instead of through somebody else's. um, Somebody who's not authentic, right? I mean, like for example, when somebody's not being authentic, right, they're acting kind of like through not a character, but how should I put this, like through it's like they're living in reaction.
Interesting. It's like they've kind of built an avatar for themselves.
Yeah,
Right.
it's like their ego.
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What I don't know. What would you guys say is like keeps people from being authentic?
Mm-hmm. Oh, Glenn, what do you think?
Well, what you just mentioned is pretty interesting. You could look at it as kind of like role playing. If you think you're living the life that you think you're supposed to live, or somebody else wants you to live, then you're not living your life.
Hmm.
And in fact, that was a theme in the moviegoer, and that this character watches movies, and that's how he really identifies with the world. He kind of sees roles on the screen, and he says, I could live like that. He's not living his life. He's living this kind of life that he's seen on a big screen. He said, hey, that looks like a good way to live. But that's only temporary, But so that's a person who is not have found his authentic self anyway. And if you're, like you said, if you're not acting in your intentions, if you're making choices to please other people, or because you don't want to upset someone else, or because you think that's the way people are supposed to live, well, then you're not making your choice. And that's to me, that's the deep seatedness of authenticity. I guess sometimes it's hard to find the strength to actually make that choice for you to act on your own intentions, as opposed to other people's intentions that are being imposed on you.
Right. And
mm-hmm. I was going to say that, that's real. That happens a lot when you're when you're a child. Of course, your parents are your intentions, but even when you're 16, 17, 18 years old, you're trying to break away from that, but that's still kind of the world that you're living in. Other people's intentions are prescribing your life, and that's the difficulty of that time of life, because you're trying to find your own intentions.
Yeah, and that's sort of wow. So that's true, obviously, and I think kind of that begs the question of, right, how important should comfort be to a person who's, let's say, over 18, right? And obviously contextually dependent where they are in their lives, particular disabilities they may have. But the idea is that kind of when we get to be 18, right, a lot of us have this sort of fork in the road where not everybody, obviously, because some parents are more supportive than others, but a lot of us kind of face that fork in the road when we have to decide, do we do what mom and dad tell us to, or what they want for us, and pretty much obviously sort of live in their kind of cocoon, or do we go out into the world and do something differently? Whereas kind of on the other hand, right, we might have maybe financial stability taken away from us, maybe a roof over our head taken away from us, because a lot of times what happens is, obviously, when parents get upset, they punish their children by taking something away that's significant for them. And so when it comes to kind of authenticity, the struggle that we have is we have to figure out, what does it mean to sort of be a person, right? Or what does it mean to be a person who's worthy of living, right? And of course, everybody's worthy of living, but what I mean by that is, what does it mean to like live a life that's worth living, right? So, and it's a struggle for a lot of people, because for them, unfortunately, comfort sort of, takes, what's the word?
Precedence.
Yeah, pretty much it's becomes the priority for people, and then they kind of go away, or they kind of look back on their life rather, and they think, man, I can't believe I spent so much time, right, sort of living for comfort, right, sort of living to please people. And so a lot of the people that I kind of see as a therapist, they kind of struggle with, what does it mean to sort of be safe, and also what does it mean to be liked, right? Why do I want to be liked by other people? Why do I want to be accepted by my family, my friends? Do I want to be accepted for my own values, and do I want to use them as kind of mirrors, right? Do I want to use them as reflectors, where here I am sort of actualizing my values, and they are in turn telling me like, hey, we like you because you're living up to those standards, right? Or is it that we want to be liked because we're constantly living up to other people's standards and their values? And so, I mean, that kind of begs the question again of, what does it mean to live a life that's worth living? Is it worth sort of giving up the idea, or not the idea, I guess the desire of being liked by people who might not like you so much for being yourself? Or is it better, or are you better off being the person that you want to be, obviously, and then having maybe some people hate you for it?
I mean, yeah, right. I mean, if you're being true to yourself, right? I mean, a lot of times what happens is you do have to deal with that. Some people are going to like you, and some people are really not going to, right? But I mean, that's not in every case, but that comes with the territory, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you want to express yourself fully and let the chips fall where they may,
Mm-hmm.
right? I mean, yeah, there's consequences to that, right?
Yeah.
And also, one thing that I noticed, I don't know why I didn't bring it up before, is everyone who we see as like an icon in our society, like a celebrity, or somebody famous, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of these people, I'm not going to say every single one of these people, but the reason why we like them is because there's something about them when they perform or when they're out there it's them being authentic, them being real, them being true to themselves. That usually is what gets them their audience, or gets them their fans, or something like that. Definitely not everybody. I mean, obviously there's actors who are, I mean, I'm sure there's actors who are assholes. There's musicians, like, not that being an asshole doesn't mean you can't be authentic either, right? But
they're authentically assholes.
Assholes.
Yeah.
Like, that's a real asshole.
Yeah. I mean, at least they're being true to themselves, I guess.
Yeah. So actually, that's true though. Some people like assholes, right?
Yeah.
So that's a different conversation, right? But right. So it's interesting. It's like when somebody finds what it means to be authentic, a lot of times they'll start to notice as like a symptom, not that you should be trying to be authentic to get this,
right,
but as a symptom, people start to like you more or appreciate you more. And they start to, whatever path that you take, even though in the beginning you might get a lot of resistance from family, all these people kind of want you to stay in your cocoon.
Mm-hmm.
Eventually, once you do make your own path, they actually start to be okay with it. And for the most part, yeah.
Yeah, because I think a lot of times, like, family members think they're really being helpful. Like, when they're telling you, like, so Glenn, in our culture, the thing is, like, if you're not a doctor or a lawyer, like, our parents are just like, okay, you're like wasting your life. But I get from their perspective, they think they're being helpful, because in their minds, they're like, well, this is the only thing that's going to really provide. It's black and white thinking, obviously. But to them, it's like, it's the only thing that's going to ever provide you stability. And we get that, right? So the battle with the tug of war is not necessarily between somebody who has like malintent or wants to harm you in some way. The battle is literally between two different ideologies. Your belief system says this is the only way that you can be successful. Our belief system is a bit more open-minded. So it's sort of this tug of war where the idea is, hopefully somewhere in the long run, if you do choose the thing that you want, that eventually you get to show them like, oh, hey, I actually could have done this thing and been successful. Here it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's funny you bring that up. I have a friend who's a retired judge, and he always said when he grew up, he knew since he was a little kid, he either had to be a doctor or a lawyer, and he couldn't stand the sight of blood. So he knew since kindergarten he was going to be a lawyer, and that was what his parents or his whole family had planned for him. So there was no choice in the matter. And it's not that his parents didn't care about him. They just saw that as how he could best live his life, you know. And so that's, most of us have a little more freedom than that in the choices we're gonna take. But that's kind of interesting you bring that up.
Was he happy? Was he happy with his decision?
Yeah, so fortunately for him, it turned out to be a kind of a discipline that he was very interested in anyway. So it worked out good in his case. But you know, in other instances, it could have been less interesting or less fortunate. But like you were mentioning a while back, comfort. So it's not just the people you're in. You know, you could have be in a profession that's providing some pretty good material comfort, but you know, you have no interest in that, or you don't think you're maybe serving society as well as you could. And so it takes a bit of gumption to say, no, I'm going to do something else that's going to provide a lot less comfortable standard of living, but I think that is a better use of me in the world doing some work. You know, that's not an easy decision to make sometimes too, to give up that comfort, especially if you have a family that's kind of become used to that level of comfort too, and you're asking more than just yourself to change your lifestyle.
Yeah. And sometimes for people, I guess it's okay for it to just be a means to an end rather than the end in itself. Like if they just focus on the bigger picture of what the job is providing for them, for their family members. I mean, the ideas obviously becomes easier to tolerate. But ideally, and I don't know, I mean, this is ideally, but I think it's definitely possible. You have the sort of best of both, or the best of both worlds, where you have a sense of comfort and obviously in terms of your salary. But then on top of that, you have something that you not necessarily find brings you joy, because that doesn't have to be the end goal, but at least something that brings you meaning. Right. Yeah. It has to be meaningful, because nothing, and I say at least, I really shouldn't have said at least, but it should bring you meaning, because the idea is you can never have a job that's like always making you happy. I've never, like, you know, these people who like these Instagram, like influencers who are like, oh, I love waking up on Mondays. Mondays is like my favorite day of the week. Full of shit. Nobody loves waking up on Mondays to go to work. Give me a break. Right. But yeah, but the idea is in the bigger picture, you see that if you like the job, what that tends to mean is that you find the work to be meaningful, that there are sort of pockets of happiness as well as pockets of sadness. But in the bigger picture, you see that like, oh, this actually adds up to something that's important.
Yeah, and I'm glad you actually brought up Instagram influencers, right? Because what's interesting about that path, right? Or even those kids who make money playing video games, or people making money off of podcasts and all these alternative kind of to the mainstream kind of jobs. I would say, you know, it's interesting. What would you say to those kids who, because the thing is, when they make those decisions early on, they also have to struggle with, you know, should I be fully investing in college? Should I be fully investing in this established profession where, you know, that it's like it's the beaten path. It's something that you know is reliable, that you can do, that'll bring you security. Right. Or should you do this thing that you're actually passionate about doing, or that you know at the time you think you're passionate about. Right. And I wouldn't want to say to like every kid, you know, that I mean, I recommend it. You should go to college. You should try all these things. Why not? You know, if you have the opportunity, why not? Yeah, just see what the world has to offer, right? Mm-hmm. But there comes a time where if you, for example, somebody wants to try to do one of those other alternative professions, I mean, obviously their parents initially won't be okay with it. Not in all cases, but stuff like that. Mm-hmm. Or their friends are gonna not believe in them, or maybe they will. It depends, right? Everybody's situation is different, but those people have to deal with trying to be authentic too, and it's got to be really hard, especially initially. Yeah.
It's like if you're thinking about like the person who's trying to become something, I guess something where to be honest, I mean, I guess this is just what it is, where a few people really succeed, right? I mean, it's like we're talking about like video gamers who obviously get paid in terms of their victories, right? People who enter some kind of sport, like boxing, obviously, which we spoke about with Glenn extensively last time. When we're talking about these ideas and these professions, I mean, the essential part of them is that you have to literally be the best at it, because if you're not, it's very hard to succeed.
Yeah.
That's true. And sometimes I want to go back. You were talking about no one has a job that provides great meaning or joy to them all the time.
Right.
Like most of the time, that's probably not the case. What you hope is you get little pockets of the joys that go, man, I like doing this. You know, or sometimes a job provides the opportunity for you to have to find meaning. So it provides you the material comforts that you could live without extreme worry, and then you have some free time to devote to what you might call a vocation that's not bringing you money, but you're serving the world in some way, or serving yourself even in some way, you know. And like that idea was first introduced to me by a woodworker, one of those guys who makes one-of-a-kind furniture that, you know, sells for a whole lot of money, and there's so very few people could buy. And so this guy wrote a few books. His name was James Krenov, and I really liked his philosophy. And he was saying you have to make what you want to make. You can't worry about if it's going to be sold or for how much it's going to be sold. And he goes, I understand that means you have to find some way to pay your rent and put food on your table, but you do that so that you have some free time, so you could do something that is not constrained by material needs at all. Because, and that was his freedom. You know what he says? So I've had times where I'm doing some, you know, just rough woodwork or doing some, you know, construction type work to pay the bills. And then when I get home on the weekend, I'm making a chair or a dresser, you know, that's really, really beautiful, but maybe no one's going to buy. And so a job is not always supposed to be just psychologically exciting. Sometimes it provides the basis so you could go find some interest and be authentic with yourself.
Right. And I was actually thinking of that too when you asked that question. So in terms of like, what would you say to those people who do want to become either influencers or gamers or whatever, right? I mean, I would honestly, my advice would be like literally have a day job. So I'm not against obviously becoming any of those things. Look, if you can be a great influencer or a video gamer, great. I mean, obviously it's going to take a lot of time and effort, but the idea is you also need to have some sort of background, like where you're literally doing something else for a living too on top of that. Like imagine if we were just doing the podcast without a day job.
I was just thinking.
Right? Like that would be awful, right? We can't make a living off of this, at least not yet. So the idea is that we also, and plus I think also our day jobs kind of in some way obviously influence our work. So the idea is that there has to be, I don't know if has to be is the right term, but I think it's best if there's some sort of synergy where like literally sort of your passion at, let's say your passion in your other work, right? And somehow in some way motivates you to do this sort of daily grind or the day to day, right? Which obviously in turns gives you, or not in turn, well, okay, yeah, in turn. So how contributes to obviously your motivation, even if the sort of contribution is just knowing that you have food on the table and obviously you're willing, or you have an ability to pay your bills. But the idea is unfortunately, unless like you are, you know, kind of a rich kid, what happens is sometimes kids go into like these fields at like 18 years old because they're 18 years old and nuanced thinking isn't something that just comes naturally for them. They go into these fields thinking like, oh, but I have the talent. Even if that's true, right? They might have the talent, again, video gaming, influencing, whatever, and they think that talent is going to carry them through. Unfortunately, a lot of times with life, it's just not that simple.
Right. I mean, very few people make money at those types of things that are wonderfully enjoyable. Very few people make money at something like that. So you it's not exciting. It's kind of hard to swallow when you're 18 or 19 years old. You need to get a durable day job and then do that on your free time, you know.
Yeah, it's smart, right? I mean, you're still carving out time to do that thing that's meaningful to you, and at the same time you have some security to kind of take care of yourself, be independent. Also, it depends on your situation. Maybe sometimes people have to work so this way they can help out their family, right? So I mean, yeah, it's just smart to make time for both things, like that day job and that passion.
Yeah.
If you can make your passion your work, more power to you, right? If you can't, then maybe that's just something where you just want to do a service or an artist, right? And not a lot of artists make money doing their work, right? So obviously they have to make money somehow, right? But it doesn't mean you don't have to work on your art, or that you can't work on your art and you can't still do it anymore and not be true to yourself and be authentic.
Right.
Yeah.
And then even, go ahead, Glenn.
Oh, okay. So I was just going to
That's
say,
fine.
so that it doesn't mean you're not authentic because you have a day job, or like you're selling out, so to speak.
Yeah.
I think you're even more authentic because you're saying, I have this work I want to do, but it's not going to provide the kind of life that my family needs. I need insurance and food and a house, but I'm going to devote whatever it is, 10 or 15 hours a week to this, and that means that's how you assert your sense of authenticity in the world. Not everyone, say acting, for example, very, very few people make money acting. A very, very few make an exorbitant amount of money, but most actors have day jobs and are working in, say, local theater or smaller plays where they're not paid well enough to live on, so they have to uh, support themselves in other ways. These are not inauthentic people. These are the most authentic people because they've accepted the necessity of dedicating a large portion of their life to an act that's just going to bring in some money, but they haven't given up on life then and said, but I'm still going to do what it is that makes me me, because some people can say, all right, well, if I can't be a full-time actor, if I have to be an accountant somewhere, then the hell with acting, I'm done with it. Well, that's quitting.
Yeah.
And how you assert your authenticity is to say, and then I'm going to do my theater here in the evenings after my accounting job, so to speak. I mean, that's an authentic, strong person.
Right. And I think just to kind of piggyback off of that, so advice for parents, right, if there is any, is that like hopefully kind of you guys, sort of discontinue thinking of it in the black and white way, where it's either the person has a like full and stable career and has kind of a makes a good living, right? Or obviously on the other hand, they kind of pursue their passion, that it can be both. And I guess sort of from or from my perspective at least, so when it comes to kind of Russian parents, unfortunately, they think that like either being a doctor or a lawyer is the only career that offers stability. Obviously, that's not true. So the problem is also if you're becoming a doctor or a lawyer and you also want to become an actor, you can't do that, right? Lawyers starting out work anywhere from like 60 to 70 hours a week, if not sometimes more. Obviously, when you're in residency, you're not going to be like going to auditions on the side. So the idea is that sort of like for kids, we would kind of tell them or teach them, hey, you guys have options here, right? But we want you to know that sort of in our guideline or in the, let me see how I can phrase this, in the vagueness of our guideline, like it's not that you have to either become one profession or the other, but you do have to choose something that would allow you to be stable if you do want to pursue a passion on the side. Because the idea is, again, so doctors and lawyers are not the only people that make money. And look, at the end of the day, they make a great living, obviously. But if that person doesn't want to make that kind of money, as a parent, you would have to also accept it. Because really what they only really need is an income to stability if they don't have a family. Even if they do have a family, they need pretty much an income that could suffice for themselves and possibly their family. But the idea is that you would have to be open to the fact that this person, right, is willing to take care of him or herself, but on the side that they actually want to pursue their passion. So this way they have a kind of fallback and they don't feel like they're being controlled. Because what happens, unfortunately, in the long run is if you try to push someone to a particular profession or you give them like less than a handful of choices, what's going to happen is they're going to rebel and they're just going to do something completely different. And then both of you guys are kind of screwed and you've ruined your relationship.
Right.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you guys follow football. I don't so much anymore, but there was a guy named Todd Marinovich. So I don't know if he's 30 years ago or something. So his dad decided that his son was going to be a quarterback probably from the moment he was born. So he groomed him to be as healthy and as skilled and as trained as possible. Like the poor kid, and it turned out he had great athletic talent. So he made it to the NFL and played with the Raiders, but he was just a psychological mess because his dad just lived his life through his son. Absolutely. And so the Todd grew up to be a professional quarterback. You're still a great athlete, but he was just a mess because he had never developed internally, and his dad had never let him grow up as a whole human being. He was just a factory element for every day of his life. And it's just a sad thing. So he ended up short circuiting, doing a lot of drugs,
Yeah.
ending his athletic career far earlier than was necessary because he just fell apart internally.
Oh my God, that reminds me of this boxer. What was his name? Oh, Glenn, you would know. All right, I'm gonna look it up in like a second. Obviously, when the spotlight isn't on me.
Who, Vinny?
Huh?
Vinny?
No, not Vinny. So it was another. I'm going to look up the name. So the story with him and Glenn, maybe this will kind of spark your memory. So there's actually a Netflix documentary on him. So the story with him was essentially that his dad, another one of these kind of narcissists, so he pretty much groomed him to be a fighting machine. And so he said that he never had any affection from his father, unless like he was like punching people and winning his fights. And so his story was so interesting because, well, I mean, even without his father, it was an interesting story, but just that relationship made it so interesting because like there was I think this final kind of point where he eventually realized that his dad actually didn't love him for him, that he just loved what he could do for the family and like sort of the pride that he brought on them. And so there was this point where I remember he was like he talked about being like knocked out and hospitalized. I don't remember who the fight was against. Oh man, I gotta look this up because this is really good stuff. So he was hospitalized against somebody, and then his dad's reaction from, I think it was either his aunt or his mom or somebody told him, maybe not his mom. I wish I remembered more about this. So they told him, they said, "Oh, well, your dad's reaction was, oh, he got hurt. Good, let him die. He deserves it." So yeah,
wow.
and as soon as he heard that, so what happened was he's like, I'm done. He's like, I quit boxing. Like as soon as he found that out, he's like, I don't care how good I am, I'm never doing this again. So what he really loved was like theater, and so what he found was that he could actually merge the both worlds. Like so he's like, look, I didn't hate boxing, I just wasn't like passionate about it. But he's like, there were people in Hollywood who were like, hey, we can actually like use you as like as a trainer, right, for our actors. And so what he ended up doing is he actually ended up transitioning into Hollywood. And so what he does now is that he works as like one of these stage coaches where like he doesn't teach people how to act, but he teaches them how to fight. And so what's so cool about that is that he's like, look, he's like, I took this thing that I was really good at, obviously I didn't really love, but he's like, but I turned it into something that I love, right? Because he's like, I love acting, right? He's like, I don't love fighting, but he's like, but in that fight, right, or in teaching them how to fight, I'm really teaching them how to act, right? I'm teaching them, right? I teach them how to become a better fighter. And I think toward the end, he was saying that he pretty much hadn't had any relationship with his father, and his dad ended up like dying from cirrhosis or something. But he said, look, man, he's like, at the end of the day, he's like, I realized that what I was doing, I was really living for his affection, that there was no part of me, right, that was actually sort of valuable to him. He's like, my hands were valuable, right? Sort of my feet were valuable. It was what I kind of brought to the family. But as a person, he's like, he didn't give a shit what I liked, what I wanted, what my dreams, desires were for the future. He's like, none of that mattered to him. All that mattered was that I was a prize fighter and that he could kind of send me out there and he could win and he could feel good about himself.
I hadn't heard that story.
I'm going to look it up.
Who it is.
Yeah, I'm going to look it up.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. So like the moment you started looking it up, I was like, "Oh, dead air." I got I was just waiting
it's
for
on Alan.
Whatchamacallit. So Glenn, anyway, I wanted to ask this earlier. Did you hear about Mike Tyson's thinking about coming back to the ring?
Yeah. So I'm hoping that doesn't happen because I guess if he boxes exhibitions, or kind of glorified sparring matches, that would be okay. That probably still is not great, but that would be better. But I would hope he doesn't think he could be boxing.
Yeah, because he's 53 now.
Yeah,
I think.
Yeah. Who is he fighting against? Did he say? Because it's not Holyfield.
Well, at first I heard he was going to box exhibitions with Holyfield. So that's another thing. I wouldn't want to see Evander get hit in the head anymore either. It's just, it's people are so much slower in their 50s, and both those guys were really great boxers. And at the peak of their youth, I think they would dominate in today's heavyweight category. So they were far better in their day than anyone is in this day. But those guys are nearing 60 years old, and the human body just can't engage in a sport like that at age 60. And plus, I think boxing is never safe for the head, but it's just not healthy for 50 or 60-year-old men be getting punched in the head, because I think the brain, the damage to the brain is at a higher greater rate than when you're young. And the damage is I don't know if it's exponentially greater, but it's certainly geometrically greater than what happens when you're a young person.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
what do you think his intention is? Like, how come you think he's coming back?
Why I can't guess with all of them, and I don't know what their finances are. They might be getting offered a lot of money to do this, but that's it's kind of like you're saying. A lot of their lives are probably anticlimactic right now. After you've lived at the level both those guys have to just kind of get up and play with your grandkids or watch TV is not quite as exciting, and they might want to be trying to rekindle their youth a little bit.
Yeah. Okay. And here's just really quickly. So the show is called Losers on Netflix. And so it's like a series about different people who like pretty much grew through losing in some substantial way. So this is the kind of caption about this guy. So the miscast champion forced into boxing by his abusive fighter. His name is Michael Bent. So Michael Bent became a world champ, but a knockout loss changes his life and helps him find his true passion.
Michael Bent, I've heard of it. I will look into that. Thanks very much.
You're welcome. Yeah, it was a really, really, really good show. And what's so cool about just the show itself is that and it's obviously called Losers. So the reason why it's called Losers is pretty much like, kind of the concept behind it is that most of us would want to give up after some substantial loss. So for these people, in some way, they found that kind of not only that they had new life after the loss, but in the loss, right, they found something significant, or they created something significant from it. And so for Michael Bent, what he learned in that loss is that, like, hey, I'm actually now accepting my sort of true calling, right? Which isn't this. Now that I even know, like now that I can actually fully accept that I'm never going to win my father over unless I obviously persist in being a champion, and I can't do that. Now I realize that I could just let go of retaining his love or his affection, and now I can actually move on. And in the documentary, he said that loss was, and that he said the knockout, the coma, everything that happened to him was the greatest moment of his life.
Right.
Right.
Oh, man, that would be interesting. Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I'll look into that.
Yeah, but yeah, back to Tyson just for fun.
Okay, sure.
So it could be you're right. Yeah, right. It could be that they reached some point in their life. It's a little anticlimactic. Maybe they want to, right, get some of that glory back, or just kind of get the love of the fans again and all that. Or yeah, maybe it's a money thing.
I don't think so. So this is just my assessment, obviously, just because he said something that was really important. He said oh no, it wasn't him. So somebody, I think his friend, or maybe, no, it wasn't his wife. So somebody said that like after Tyson quit boxing, and even in the period where he had the podcast, that he was like severely depressed. And for him, it kind of seems like not only his meaning and obviously purpose, but like his self-esteem seems to be tied into fighting.
Oh, okay. So just a little backstory. I know a little bit about what happened with Tyson. So so pretty much what happened is that he actually got over that.
Okay.
Right? He did heal. He started other businesses. Right. I think he has some kind of marijuana business that he has.
A cannabis farm. Right.
Well, that he did some kind of Netflix thing where he talked about not Netflix, HBO, where he talked about his life.
Yeah.
Okay. But one thing that's interesting anyway, though, that you mentioned, that since he stopped boxing, he actually hasn't, until recently, he hadn't done any kind of training.
Right.
And he was on Joe Rogan's podcast, and Rogan's like, oh, you don't work out anymore, you don't box still, or like train a little bit. And he said something along the lines of, no, I can't, because if I do, I'm going to awaken a certain part of myself,
the ego,
his ego, his the beast side of himself, right? And I could see that, right? Because maybe that's a part of his life that he wanted to kind of forget about. He wanted to forget violence. He wanted to forget rage, right? He wanted to just make peace. Mm-hmm. But one thing that was funny about him coming back recently is, I don't know the exact tweet or where he put this on Instagram or whatever. I kind of just heard about it.
Right.
But he said something like, and this was kind of scary. He said, the gods of war are calling me back, or something like that. Like the beast is back or something. And I was just like, okay,
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's, and he has gotten into great shape again, right, as far as that goes. But Glenn, I'm with you. Yeah. If you're 50 years old, I hope that whatever they do, it's not like serious punches to the head or to the body, because your body doesn't heal the way it used to when you're younger. Right. So, yeah.
And I don't want to be hypocritical. If I would probably watch it. So even though I don't want him to do it, I probably would still watch it if they do it.
Yeah.
But it would be hard. If you're a great baseball player, if you could keep playing, you would. Because who wants to give up what they do best in the world? That you're one of the most singularly talented people in the world. No one wants to give that up. But the reason baseball players don't get to play anymore is because they slow down so much they can't hit the pitching.
Yeah.
And the same thing happens to boxers too. But in the world of boxing, there's always somebody willing to make some money off of you. And or there's always somebody willing to promote boxing a little bit.
Right. And you know what I wonder, because like obviously he was trained by Customato, and like I look, I don't know all of the gaps that I can't fill in, but I do remember obviously kind of from watching and reading about his story was that the only time he really felt loved was obviously like Michael Bent, right, when he was able to produce. And in his mind at that time, he's sort of like, I think Eva Rogan said it, like he was literally built to be a machine. So his sense of validation and affection, or self-affection, literally came from being the machine. And I wonder if, even though pure hypothetical territory, but I wonder, like, as he kind of moved on with his life, if he wasn't able to sort of find that self-validation elsewhere. Maybe he tried, right? Maybe there was a part of him, because I know he said that he wasn't really ever happy when he wasn't high. Like, that was his thing. He's like, I'm like not a nice person to be around. So I wonder if he like really tried to find that validation elsewhere, but somewhere down the line he realized, like, this is it. It's either I fight and I'm worthy, or I don't and I'm worthless. Mm-hmm. And this is pure speculation, obviously.
Hey man, that's sure, guys. This is your career. You help people like that. So he might be an extreme case, but it seems to me, I mean, Tyson grew up in deplorable conditions and really didn't have much of a childhood. And I think he was in in the juvenile system since he was 11 or 12, and D'Amato, I think, is the only person who probably ever really took care of him. But even then, that was conditional, because D'Amato did that because he said, oh my God, this guy is a phenom. And so D'Amato's love for Tyson was conditional. And, you're intelligent enough to pick up on that after a while. Maybe not when you're 13 or 14, but once you've grown up, you do. And, sometimes scars like that, you can't remove them. They're just, sometimes they're just there.
Right.
And you deal with people like that all the time, I imagine.
Yeah. And that's sort of like the fundamental difference between people. Okay, let me not simplify this too much, but I'm going to say it anyway. So it's not 100% true, but it's mostly true. So it's like the fundamental difference between people who struggle with mental illness and who don't are literally the people who don't accept that they're unconditionally lovable. Whereas the people who do believe that their worth is based on something, some sort of external, right? So when we talk about that person, right, like Michael Bent, right, being inauthentic, the idea is he really believed that love was conditional. So the kind of internal struggle happens between, should I really be who I want to be, right? And should I kind of like, let's say, manifest the qualities that I want to exhibit in the world, like the ones that I feel like there's an inner pull toward? Or on the other hand, right, should I sort of accept that I have to be this other person to be loved? And so the inner struggle, and sometimes people kind of falter at it, right? They kind of get sucked into it, where they feel like the only way to resolve it is either by suicide or some other form of avoidance. Is essentially, I have to choose between, do I try to be myself, right, who there's a good chance might not be lovable, or do I try to become the person that everybody or another person wants me to be and attain love in the way it's actually sort of possible for me, conditional. And I think maybe that's what Tyson still struggles with, that for him, the idea is that validation or self-validation can only come through boxing. Even if my wife, my children love me, maybe there's some part of him that doubts it, or maybe there's some part of him that doesn't believe it. Maybe there's some part of him that goes back to the Gus D'Amato days and says, no, the only time I ever felt worthy was literally when this person told me I was.
Yeah. So again, I don't know if that's the case, but it sure sounds plausible, doesn't it?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I gotta say though, one thing that I think is useful from Mike Tyson's background is, so I don't know the full details of this, but when he was working with D'Amato, what D'Amato would do is he had him listening to these audio, not like some kind of audio or audio tapes, something like that, that would keep getting his mindset really sharp. Like, I think it was affirmations, but don't quote me on that. Be like, I'm a winner. I'm strong. I'm a winner. I'm the best, all this kind of stuff. And he literally programmed himself for success. Right. And I think that's actually pretty interesting, as far as, like say somebody is struggling with doing what is authentic to them, maybe like from a place of fear, or a place of they're afraid of what other people are going to think. This isn't like a full solution or anything like that. I think it's just like one little thing somebody could try is, yeah, like maybe try things like affirmations, or listening to things that kind of put you in the right kind of mindset that help you to kind of take that action. But in the end anyway, it's all about, you know, you making the choice to take that step. Like nobody's going to do it for you. No amount of listening to something is going to, you know, I mean, it's going to help you to take action, but ultimately they're not going to do it for you. I know I repeated myself there, but whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I hear you. But yeah, so I mean, I guess Tyson's psychology is an interesting one. And I think a lot of people in sports, and obviously boxing in particular, kind of have to fight through it. And so the idea is, I think, just taking aside conditional and unconditional love, I think what's also important is that a person has to believe that they're able to or capable of becoming something else outside of the sport, which fortunately or unfortunately for a lot of these guys, especially based on where they grew up, isn't really, or doesn't feel like it's a possibility. Like I can also imagine that if Tyson really thought at some point, most of his life probably, that the only thing he was good for is fighting, then when he kind of, you know, the fight again, that he's like, oh shit, like where's my worth now? So it could be obviously the fact that he believed that love was associated with it, or, you know, his own even, or combination, right? That his love was associated with fighting. But then the other thing was that it's possible that maybe he really didn't think he could do anything else well. Maybe the podcasting to him just didn't feel like it was enough for whatever reason. But obviously, again, all speculation.
Right. So, but the story you mentioned about the guy named Bent, that sounds like he found a way to break through all that. I mean, so maybe that's rare, but that's a wonderful story then, that he found that he's worthy of you know, he realized he's worthy of being loved, even though his father didn't provide any sense of that.
Right.
That's a nice story.
Yeah, right. It was just like, and what was so beautiful about it is that he was able to kind of reframe it from this person doesn't love me because I'm unlovable to this person doesn't love me because he's a fucking asshole.
Right. It's his problem. Yeah.
Right.
It's his loss and not mine. Yeah.
Right. All right. So Glenn, as always, man, it was so wonderful to have you on. I mean, like this show was just super illuminating. Obviously, I can't wait to read your novel. I think that's going to be fantastic.
Let's see if I could finish it.
I'm sure you'll get it done. We have plenty of time. So, and then before we go, Alan, do you have any final questions?
Well, so I know you're working on the novel still. Do you know maybe like how far do you feel like you are in it? I'm not going to ask you something like when do you think you'll be done. That's I know the whole writing process is it's a whole thing, but yeah.
So I don't know. So I like I said, I have I've written a draft, but it's just not useless. And so I've been thinking about it a lot, and I'm just about ready to start in and make another dive on it. So I don't know, maybe I'm pretty slow at this. It maybe in a year or so I'll have some idea if it's worked out or not.
Okay, cool.
I'll let you know.
Okay.
I'll let you know.
I did. So Glenn, if we wanted to follow you on social media, where can we find you?
So I'm on Twitter mainly. So that would be at Glen Sharp 33.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's it. So I'm not on Instagram. You guys were talking about that. I don't know anything about that. Mm-hmm. And so Twitter is probably the social media outlet for me.
Oh, and by the way, I really enjoyed your recent article. Who was the poet? I forgot his name.
Oh, Ted Kuzer.
Yeah.
So, she's thank you. So he's a nice poet. I like him a lot. I don't read a lot of poetry, but his poetry I like a lot.
Yeah. And what was the title of the article and website where it can be found?
It was on published by City Journal, mm-hmm. And so the title of Kuzer's book that I wrote about was Winter Morning Walks. Mm-hmm. And,
awesome. And I urge obviously all you guys to kind of go out and read it. I thought it was a really well written and well thought out article.
Oh, thank you. Thanks very much.
You're welcome, Glenn. So again, thank you so much for coming on, man. And obviously till next time, and hopefully we can have you back on when the novel's finally published.
That would be great. Thanks for having me.
All right, take care.
Take care, you guys.
See ya.
You too. Take care.
Bye.
All right. That was great.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So, guys, if you want to follow us at Seize the Moment Podcast on Facebook and on Instagram, and at Seize_podcast on Twitter.
Mm-hmm.
Like, subscribe, hit the bell. And also, just one last thing I'd like to say. Are you stressed that you can't leave the house to keep up with routine, fighting with chronic conditions such as diabetes and hypertension, having trouble coming up with healthy ways to feed the family, or simply need that support system set up to make your goals a reality? Well, Vera with Verified Nutrition offers a 15-minute consultation on her website at verifiednutrition.com. Read more about her individual journey and experiences, send her a message, check out her blog page and the services she offers, and make the choice to get verified.
And then also, one last thing, you guys can find us at the O4L Online Network at o4lonlinenetwork.com, and you can find us under the STM podcast section.
All right, guys, thanks for watching. Look forward to the next episode.